guess we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to say thank you to all of you for attending this morning and to the cat for coming and making an appearance. This morning our talk is about the spiritual side of nature. And this is a third in a series on the spiritual side of nature from a Swedenborgian perspective. So in our first time together, for those of you who are here, we talked about birds, and then we talked about trees, and today we're going to focus on animals. Now I realize how broad of a topic that is, animals, and that it's really hard to do justice to even one animal in an hour's time. So we are going to do the best that we can. My name is Alison Olson. I'm a minister of a Swedenborgian church in Pretty Prairie. My family and I live here in Hutchinson, and we try to come to the zoo when the weather's nice and when we can. I almost considered if it were to be a possibility to meet outside, but I think we're all glad with the wind that we're down here this morning. So this this topic, the spiritual side of nature, I think it would be good to begin with the second portion of that, which is from a Swedenborgian perspective. So we're going to think about what does that Swedenborgian part mean, and who is Swedenborg? The name Swedenborgian comes from a man named Emanuel Swedenborg. He lived about 300 years ago. He lived 1688 to 1772. And as his name suggests, he was from Sweden. He grew up in a religious household. His father was a bishop in the Lutheran church. So he had that atmosphere in his home as he was growing up, but he was not to follow in his father's footsteps. He had a very scientific mind, and he accomplished some amazing things during his life. And what I want to hand out here, some of you have seen this before, but if you have not, I want to hand this out. So believe it or not, I still have my handout. Anybody would like a copy here? And anybody need one? So Robert Ripley, who did the Believe It or Not series, I'm sure everybody's familiar even with that phrase, believe it or not, wrote about Emanuel Swedenborg. And because he accomplished so many things, he was really a genius during his day. And just a few things that I think are amazing, all of it really is to me, but he discovered the function of the ductless glands and that the brain animates with the lungs together. He wrote and published the first Swedish algebra. He had the first sketch of a glider-type airplane. And I don't know if any of you have been to the Smithsonian in D.C., but in the Air and Space Museum, his is the very first exhibit with his plane. It also says on here that he originated the nebular hypothesis of the solar system and explained the nature of the Milky Way, among other things. So because I grew up in this faith tradition knowing about Swedenborg, it doesn't matter how much I know about what he did, I'm always still amazed at the variety and the depth of his knowledge. And also, he must have had such a hunger to understand the natural world for his mind to travel in this many different directions. So Ripley describes him as the living encyclopedia, which I think is a good name for him. And what Ripley explains here at the bottom is that at the age of 56, he gave up the study of worldly science and became a seer and a theological revelator. And the last 28 years of his life were devoted to giving to the world a new religious philosophy, and it gave rise to a church that called themselves the New Jerusalem Church, which started in London. So, how did he go from being this man with this scientific genius to turning that attention to the spiritual realm. He had dream diaries and he had journals, and he describes this process, this events that happened to him, that he had visions and dreams in which he was sensing the Lord's presence with him. And that ultimately the Lord wanted him to, instead of focusing that mind of his on the natural world, to focus all of that energy on the spiritual realm. And so he believed that God was opening up to him the spiritual world. And it was his job to describe that. So that sounds pretty crazy to some of us. I mean, as I said before, if you had a friend who told you that they were conversing with God and God was going to be showing them the afterlife and that they had this job to do, it would sound really nuts. Well, people did question his sanity later, but when this happened to Swedenborg, he felt like he didn't want to tell anyone about it. And he published anonymously for as long as he could. And one of the reasons is that he did not want it to be about him. He wanted his writings to stand for themselves and what they might teach us and not make it about him. But it was interesting, I was rereading some of that time in his life when he was experiencing these visions and dreams. And this was not an easy process. I mean, Ripley explains it in one sentence. He became a seer and a theological revelator. And it sounds like he just moved into this new phase of his life. And he did move into that new phase in his life. And it was really hard and really a struggle for him. And he writes about his pride and how hard it was for him because he was this genius. And he was famous. He had fame and he loved it. And he wanted to keep discovering things about the natural world. And he was sad that he couldn't really do that anymore because he felt like if he turned his back on this calling he felt he had, then he would be doing a really great harm to his life personally. The other thing, as I mentioned, his pride. He writes about how he kept this to himself, remember, but when people, he says, he was very honest. He says when he'd be in conversation with someone, and if they didn't respect him the way that he thought they should respect him, in his mind he would be saying, if you only knew that God was talking to me, you wouldn't treat me like that. But then he would pray again and again for humility because he felt like that was really something he had to get out of the way, was his pride. So that's kind of an interesting piece of his story. Now, a church did form in his name after his death, and he never wanted that. So that's a good thing to remember as far as his humility. He didn't really want that. And what he was writing about was the afterlife. He has a book called Heaven and Hell. He describes what he saw. So he kind of writes as a scientific person exploring the afterlife. If he writes about what he sees, what he observes, you can still tell it's a scientific mind approaching the afterlife. So he writes about that, an experience there. And then the other thing to mention is that he did write about the Bible. And he wrote 12 volumes alone on Genesis and Exodus, and he goes line by line by line, detailing what every verse meant. And the reason he did that is because he saw these different layers in Scripture that he hadn't seen before, that he felt God was revealing to him in this part of his life. So if you look at the Bible, you can see where there's a historical level, a layer of meaning. And then he saw a different layer of meaning. He saw even the history of a people, a history of churches throughout time. On a different level, he sees the way that each bit of Scripture speaks to our personal journey. So, for example, when we think about creation story, it wasn't just 7 days of creation. Now, he was a scientist. He didn't see that happening in that way, but he saw it as the way that we can have these different stages in life as we deepen in our faith. and are experienced. So he saw that, and then at the very deepest layer, he saw what he thought was a telling about God. And it's something that we normal people don't see very readily. And there's instances that come through, for example, when Jonah's in the whale for 3 days. That's like a little clue when you think about Jesus in the tomb for 3 days. So there's little bits that come through, but as his mind was open, he saw these amazing different layers of meaning in Scripture. I'm glad you're listening. I'm glad you're all in the front row. Yes. Star student here in the front row. That's right. So today what we're trying to get to is understanding how Swedenborg saw nature and then animals. How did he see the animal kingdom? So to begin, a good way of trying to get into that discussion is his understanding of who God is. And as God was revealed to him, he saw God as all love and all wisdom. There. And like most other religious traditions, he saw that God is the creator of everything and the creator of the natural world. Okay. So God is, with all of that love and that wisdom, created the natural world. And not only did God create everything, but God continues to sustain the natural world. So that love and that wisdom is flowing into all of nature, all of us, in every moment of our lives. And that's what's keeping us all alive. That's what's animating us. Now, that's kind of interesting to think about, animate, because animal, they have the same root, and it's about life force. So God is, that love and that wisdom continues to come into our lives and animate us, bring us to life. That's kind of a big picture of things. That's what's happening, and yet we're not seeing that. Very few of us would be able to say, I see distinctly how God's love and wisdom is right now flowing into this room and into us right this minute. But we can see that process a little better within ourselves. So Swedenborg felt that this process, this love and this wisdom, which is, I'm going to call another word here, spirit, because it's not really tangible in the same way that we can touch things and know of things in the natural world. So this spiritual part is influencing and affecting this natural part. And as I said, he saw that the same process is happening in each one of us. So the way we see that is that we also, I'm going to mark it here, we also have what we might call an inner life or a spiritual life. And we also have an outer life or more natural part of ourselves. So Swedenborg saw that distinction in who we are as people. That we have this inner part of us, and then we kind of have an external outer part of us. Now, at some point in our lives, we begin to realize the difference between the two. And I was remembering, there was a story by Helen Keller. She was a Swedenborgian. She loved Swedenborg's writings, and it helped her with her life. She writes of a time when she was younger, but this was after she learned how to read and communicate. So she is sitting in a room somewhere, reading a story about ancient Greece or ancient Rome. It was somewhere very far away. And she was so into that story that she forgot for a moment that she was sitting in this chair somewhere in North America, right? It's the same thing if you go to the movies. If you ever have that feeling like you forgot for a moment that you were at the movies because you're so into the movie itself. Well, she has this realization when she all of a sudden is aware again that she's sitting in this chair. She's thinking, I have this inner life, this mind and feelings that are not connected with this physical person that's sitting here. So she thought she had this inner person And she realized that there's a difference between that livelihood and that ability of her mind, her thoughts, her feelings, with the person that she was. And this was really important for her because here she is, deaf and blind, and this natural part of her, which is so useful to us and helps us get around and communicate. And it would her too, but she faced all these difficulties. It was just hard for her to be in the world. Imagine what it was like for her as a child before she was finally able to communicate. So for her, this was so freeing. Just this realization that her mind was free and was just as good and as enlightening as anybody else's, and she didn't have to be shackled in her own sense of things to this physical person. Now, so we all realize at some point we have this inner life and this outer life. And one thing we might realize is that, and like Helen Keller, is that that inner life feels and is more real than this outer person that we are. Sometimes I mention with aging, that's a good way of seeing it, that we don't always feel on the inside the person we are on the outside. So that person, that whatever we want to call it, some people call it their kind of authentic self, some people call it spirit, soul, whatever it is, that real person on the inside, that's like the inner life. But what's amazing, just like God's love and wisdom is affecting and creating the natural world, is we also come to realize at some point that that inner life physically affects our outer life. And one of my favorite and best examples is still that idea of, well, tears, for example. We can be distraught or joyful, it can be tears of joy. We can feel those emotions on the inside. And even though this is a truth we've known since we were little, we first realized that tears come when we're sad. Isn't it amazing to think that our physical, our inner intangible part of ourself can cause something physical to happen, like a tear? Or even if you think about a smile, if you feel real joy on the inside and a smile comes to your face, it's like a manifestation on a different level. It's a physical manifestation of something happening on the inside. So this is how, seeing a little bit of that, is how Swedenborg sees nature. And that is that all of the rocks, the trees, the grass, every part of nature is a physical manifestation of God's love and wisdom, and it's just taking different forms. Isn't that amazing to think of? I mean, to me, that brings nature alive. Because it's not just maybe a tree we can picture in our mind up there on the grass. It's not just a tree we're seeing, and we know it grows, but it's not just a tree. It's connected to God's love and wisdom in the same way that our tears are connected to any feelings we might have inside. So that really brings nature alive. Now, animals are also a part of this. And when we have that relationship between something inner and something outer, when it's responsive, this is what Swedenborg called a correspondence. And I want to write this up here because he uses this word a lot in his writings. So he might say that smile, for example, is a correspondence of joy, something like that. So he uses this word a lot, and that's when something is has that relationship. It's kind of reflexive. So so this is where he's coming from. So everything is corresponding in this natural world to some part of God's love and wisdom. So the question today is, what do animals correspond to? What part of that love and wisdom? How can we see animals within this framework? Now, a different approach to this, we might say that Swedenborg saw the whole purpose of our life is to become a heavenly person. That means the whole purpose of our life is to grow in love and wisdom, to love God and to love neighbor. That's our purpose. And this earth that we live on is our training ground. And it's not the destination, it's our training ground. So if you think about it that way, you could see all of earth as like our classroom. And I was imagining that like any good classroom, or like this room, you bring materials into the world to have a good class. You want to have the things there that will help teach. So whoever was designing this room made sure there was chairs here. We might need chairs, we might need a table, we might need a bigger table. All these things were put in this room to help teach. And I'm imagining if you're a science teacher, you might have some microscopes. You definitely make sure you have your desks and chairs and all the things you need. So if you could look at this whole experience on earth as our classroom, and it has everything in it, God designed it so that everything here would have some use in teaching us how to be heavenly. Then also the animals are part of that classroom. And they have a use in helping us to grow, because they can teach us something. So the question is, what do they teach us? Now, the way to come up with the correspondence of these animals, we're going to try and think about what these represent. What we might wonder is, how are they different than, say, trees and rocks? How are animals different?
They're animated.
They're animated. They move, right. They're active, right. They move, right. We don't see trees crossing the road, right. They are active. Okay. And they are, compared to the feeling, the temperature of a rock, say, they're warm. Okay, how about land animals? That's where I was going today, was land animals. Okay. Okay, so they're warm. And then the other part that might help us distinguish this is, yesterday I have some mint that's coming up from last year, and I went to pick a piece, and it smelled really good. But when I picked that piece, the plant didn't say, ouch, which I'm really glad about. So what is that other difference that animals have? Feelings. Right, they're sensitive to pain and pleasure, right?
On the other hand, we are sensitive to their feelings. And you mentioned the mint plant, but if you look at studies on
I know.
that plants do feel, but we are not capable of, there's no correspondence
Right.
for us for that, but the one
Right.
animals we can.
I thought about that too, because every once in a while I'll read of something about that where they do studies trying to.
And so broccoli goes, ee.
I don't know what we do. It's hard to know what we don't know. But they'll say they're sensitive to music, or they'll grow faster certain ways. Right. So maybe I should say they're sensitive to pain and pleasure in a way that we can be aware of.
There are some plants, I wish I could think of the name of them now, I can't, but that have almost animal sensitivities and that reach out to catch something. Yeah, I mean, they're, I
The
can't, I wish I
Venus
could think.
flytrap?
Yeah.
She mentioned the Venus flytrap.
Okay,
Yeah.
you know, where they seem to be almost aware of, I mean, it's not, you know, I mean, that they're aware almost as an animal is
Yeah.
of, you know, yeah. So, I mean, the distinction there, at some level, gets to be
It's not so clear, is it?
not so clear, you
No.
know. But you know, you can understand the reason for that. I mean, yeah. There has to be a degree of difference between animals and plant life that you know, it's a very almost indistinguishable difference. Where they're plants, but you know, they almost have animal features, I mean, capabilities.
Right. Okay, so something that Okay, so now we're thinking about something within us, something in the spirit realm, something that is able to move, is warm, is sensitive to pain and pleasure. So you think, not that I would, but how could I hurt you without physically touching you? What would I hurt?
Your feelings.
Your feelings. And you said it a minute ago, feelings. So this is where Swedenborg was going with his understanding of animals, is that they correspond to different feelings that we have. And another word he uses is affections. So the things we love. And isn't it interesting, though, that we already think of, in common language, it's easy to think of times we use animals to characterize some aspect of human behavior or some characteristic. I was just thinking yesterday, I heard somebody say, I don't want to hog it. Right? So just for a moment, I thought it'd be kind of fun to think, how many other phrases can you think of with animals?
Gentle as a lamb.
Gentle as a lamb. Mm-hmm. Anything else come to mind?
He was sheepish.
Sheepish? Yep, that's a good one.
Horse sense.
Smarter than
sense.
fox.
Oh, fly, yeah, fly and
Coffee.
curious as a cat.
Right, curiosity killed the cat.
Sorry. Something like dogs here. Faithful.
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 Yes.
Mhm.
Faithful.
Loving, I need you to know it, so they respond.
You snake.
Mhm.
What about a snake?
Well, snake is a bad thing.
You know when you call somebody a snake, like a snake in the
Yeah.
grass, really low,
You snake.
or cold as sneaky.
Mhm. So probably we.
Oh, a rat, oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh.
rat, pig. There's a lot of negative ones, aren't there?
Yeah.
Cow.
Jackass.
Oh.
So we could go on with that, so we'll stop there. Now, when Swedenborg saw this as a way of looking at animals, and this is also how he saw Scripture, as he was looking at it as it had a different meaning, what he saw was really important is context. So the same animal can be positive in one context and negative in another context. And it all depends on the situation. So this morning, even when we got here and we were all petting the cat, I was hearing stories about how some cats are nice and some cats have been not so nice lately. And so it all depends on the situation and context. Now, when we were doing the trees, and I brought in some figs and olives and things of different fruits of trees, I was just going to say I don't have any pork chops or bacon or anything to hand out today. So if any of you, just feel free to get up and get a cookie. That's what we have today.
The coffee's done.
And the coffee's done. So I have a handout, so while I'm handing that out, if anybody does want to go fill up your cup or whatever, please feel free to do that.
You want a couple, is yours hot?
Yeah.
I'll have it back.
Okay. Pardon? Yes, that's true. Living example. That's even better.
Well, you had a cardinal for one, and a
Yes.
cat for another.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.